Shalom Brickworks family. I've been asked to do a piece of work on the Passover and the Feast of First Fruits. This weekend is the Feast of Passover, which you'll find in the Bible. Now if we look in Exodus, we look at Exodus chapters 11, chapters 12, it talks about the actual Passover. Passover comes from a time when the children of Israel had been slaves in Egypt for over 300 years. And after Moses and the plagues that had been in Egypt, there had been 9 plagues. And the 10th plague was the death of the firstborn. But Yahweh said that he would bring upon the whole land of Egypt, Israel included, everybody, the death of the firstborn. It's very important that we consider and understand what that means. The firstborn in every household would be the glory of the household, but also when the patriarch of any family passed away, all the responsibility would fall upon the firstborn. We talk about getting the lion's share, and so the firstborn would get the greater part of the inheritance because it was the firstborn's responsibility to look after the rest of the family and to become the head of the household for all the family, brothers and sisters and children and the mother of the household if the patriarch passed away. So the firstborn was a very, very important figure. We look at Yeshua, we look at Jesus, and he is the first begotten of God. So he holds this firstborn position. Even in his status with Mary and Joseph, he is the firstborn child. So the responsibility of the firstborn child is great. So this is why this is it's not just about the death of a child and losing children and families, but actually it's the firstborn, and Yahweh is quite specific about what he's going to do. If you read in Exodus chapters 11 and chapters 12, Yahweh talks about what he's going to do with the 10th plague, that he will pass over, he will come down into the land of Egypt and he will pass over through every household, and he will destroy the firstborn in every single household. But he speaks to Moses and he tells Moses to tell the children of Israel to take a lamb of the first year, a lamb that is pure, that is undiseased, that is without blemish, that has no sickness in it, that is a perfect lamb. And you are to slay this lamb, and you are to take the blood of this lamb and you spread it over the door frame of your households. You know, the door frame has 2 uprights and 1 lintel. We can see the picture of the cross within that, the 2 uprights together and the cross beam create this cross shape. Well, the household, which is entry, talks about a doorway going through in it, a threshold, crossing over from one place into another place. Again, this is what the cross symbolises for us. It's from death to resurrection. So they take the lamb, they slaughter the lamb, and they spread the blood over the doorposts. And when Yahweh, or the angel of Yahweh, came and passed over the land of Egypt and went through the entire land, if they saw the blood on the doorposts, the angel would pass over. The blood was a covering, it was protection, it was safety, it was security. It meant that something had paid the sacrifice already. There'd been a sacrifice. So this is what Passover is about. And with this Passover, they didn't have time to bake bread, so they had to have unleavened bread without yeast, so it wouldn't rise. There's a whole picture around that which I'll come to shortly. So they were to kill the lamb, eat the lamb, have the unleavened bread, and then Yahweh said, then I will set you free. And then that's when the Exodus occurred. They left Egypt and slavery after over 300 years of being there, and Yahweh would take them to a land that he had prepared for them. And I want to point out that, you know, when Jesus in the New Testament talks about, he talks about, my Father's house has many mansions, behold, I go to prepare a place for you. Yahweh had already chosen the land. He promised it to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, and to the descendants. He'd already chosen the land and the place that he was going to give to them. And so he was leading them out of slavery, out of the bondage that they were in and that had been in, and leading them to freedom. So Passovers are all about passing from slavery, being bound to something, being tied, not having your own free will, your own free choice, but coming out of that, out of Egypt, out of slavery, into freedom, and into a land that God has chosen for you, God has selected for you, God has set apart for you. So if you read in Exodus 11 and 12, you read all about the actual Passover, the physical, the physical. Sorry, I put the Bible down. The physical action, the physical act of this Passover, where the angel of death did come down to earth. Yahweh did come down to earth and did pass through the land of Egypt, and all the firstborn of every household, and all the animals as well, all died on that night, unless there was blood spread upon their doorposts, which the children of Israel, being obedient to Yahweh and his command, that's exactly what they did, and therefore their firstborns did not die. And they left Egypt and they went into the wilderness, and they headed towards the land, the promised land that Yahweh had promised for them. Now, in Leviticus 23, God sets aside specific times for the children of Israel to celebrate and to keep feasts. So I'm going to read this to you now. So Leviticus 23, chapter 23, verse 1 says this: And Yahweh spoke unto Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and say unto them concerning the feasts of Yahweh, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations, holy gatherings, even these are my feasts. So the first part talks about the Sabbath being one of the feasts, being part of the festival ritual. 6 days a week you shall work, on the seventh day is a Sabbath unto Yahweh, and you shall rest. It's a holy convocation, you shall do no work in it. But then it says, in verse 4, it says, These are the feasts of Yahweh. These are holy gatherings, holy convocations, which you shall proclaim in their season. So it says this, verse 5, In the 14th day of the first month, at evening, this is the Passover. And on the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread. Unto Yahweh 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. The first day will be a holy convocation, will be a high Sabbath. You shall do no work in it, but you shall offer offerings made by fire unto Yahweh 7 days. Speaking to the children of Israel, verse 10, and saying to them, When you come into the land which I give unto you, and you reap the harvest thereof, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest unto the priest. So we're going to talk about first fruits afterwards. And the priest shall wave the sheaf before Yahweh to be accepted for you on the morrow after the Sabbath. The priest shall wave it. And you shall offer that day, when you wave the sheaf, a lamb without blemish, of the first year, for a burnt offering unto God. So, here we have what's called the beginning of the year. So this might be confusing to some people, because you might not know that in Israel they have Rosh Hashanah, which is the new year, which generally starts around September, late September. It's Rosh Hashanah. It's called, the head of the year. Rosh means head, means the head of the year. So it's the beginning of the year. But Yahweh says here that this month will be the first month for you. So we have what's called the fiscal year. So in Israel, the fiscal year kind of starts in September and runs all the way through, and then the religious year starts with this month, the month of Nisan, or the month of Aviv, the spring month. I guess it's kind of similar to what we have. We have our new year that starts in January, but we have our fiscal year, which starts on the 1st of April. For all those of you who have to deal with tax, 1st of April is the beginning of the tax year. So it's similar to that. These 2 points of starting. So it says, on the 14th day of the first month, you will have the Passover. Now this is, I'm looking now at what we just looked at. So the story is from Exodus, and then the appointed feast, the appointed festivals, come from Leviticus. So God says every year, from henceforth, on the 14th day of the first month will be a Passover. You'll slay a lamb, and you will have a pure lamb, and you will slay that lamb, and you will eat that lamb. together as a family, and you will remember that God delivered you out of slavery. So this is where Passover is. This is Easter's comes off Passover over almost 15, 16, 1700 years before Easter ever came into existence. The Passover had been running for that time period already, and the children of Israel have been keeping this Passover to remind them that they've been brought out of slavery, that they've been made into a people who are not a people. They've been made into a people to their own nation. They came out of Egypt as their own nation and took on that identity, and they took that into the promised land. So this is what the Passover is about. We want to look to the New Testament, and we look, Jesus, Yeshua, was crucified on the Passover. So it says at evening you shall kill the lamb. Now we know that Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, that he was arrested, that he went to his trial. So the Jewish day starts in the evening and finishes as the sun sets. So it starts at sunset and finishes at sunset the following day. So on the evening that he was taken in the Garden of Gethsemane, that was the evening of the Passover. He'd sat down. What you call the Last Supper was the Passover meal, that he'd sat down and he'd eaten with the disciples, and he'd eaten the Passover, and then they went for a walk, which on the Passover evening he was arrested. All through that evening he was in the courts and he was being trialed, and then the next day, which was still the Passover day time, still part of the Passover day, then he was crucified later in that day. And it says that he went on the cross at 12 o'clock, and at 3 o'clock in the afternoon he died. And then Joseph of Arimathea comes to Pontius Pilate and asks for the body of Jesus and says, can I take his body, because tomorrow is a Sabbath. But it's not a Sabbath as in the seventh day. It's a Sabbath because it's the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread is what's called a high Sabbath. We read that in Leviticus 23, that on the 15th day of Nisan, on the 15th day of Aviv, the first month, it will be a holy convocation, and you shall do no servile work in it, which makes it a high Sabbath. Okay, just to clarify that. So the 14th day is Passover, and you have to work on the Passover. It's not a separate holy sacred day. It is a feast day, but it's because you have to work. You have to prepare the lamb, you've got to eat the lamb, and then you've got to get rid of it all and clear it all away. So it's a working day. Whereas the 15th day, which is the beginning of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, that's a high Sabbath. And it can happen on any day of the week, whichever day it falls on, whichever day the 14th day of the Nisan falls on. That is Passover. Whichever day the 15th of Nisan falls on, that is a high Sabbath. It lasts for 7 days, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the last day, no matter what day of the week it is, it can be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, it's a high Sabbath. No work, and the people were called together to celebrate as a congregation, to gather and celebrate the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So we know that the Feast of Unleavened Bread was there because they didn't have time to bake bread and didn't have time to let it rise, so they prepared it and they cooked unleavened bread without yeast. The New Testament talks a lot about, Yeshua talks a lot about yeast. It talks about leaven, a little bit of leaven, affects the whole batch of dough. So we know any bread bakers or any bakers of any sort know that if you put some yeast in something and you leave it, the dough rises, and the yeast affects it in such a way that it rises, and that's what it does. So yeast is often used in Scripture as sin. That a little bit of sin affects the whole thing. So there's a little bit of yeast in there, a little bit of leaven in there, it affects everything, and it rises and it expands. So that's the connection. So the children of Israel were told for 7 days they were not to have any leaven. And not only that when they came into the land that they were going to, there was to be no leaven in the household, nothing that contained any yeast whatsoever. So it is common for those people that keep the Passover, that choose to keep the Passover, that a week, 2 weeks before Passover comes, that they will go through their whole house, they will go through the whole kitchen, and they'll get on their hands and knees and they'll clean out all the cupboards, the fridge, the freezer. They'll go through every item in the household and check, has it got any yeast in it? And they'll remove the whole lot from their house. Now, it's probably a chore, probably a task. This is where spring cleaning comes from, to get rid of all the leaven. The idea of spring cleaning is to get everything out, remove all the leaven from your household. It's quite cathartic that you go through this process, but as you're going through this process, you might be thinking about the sin in your own life, going into every nook and every cranny and every area, and you're searching out where is the yeast, where is the leaven, and as you're cleaning out your cupboards and you're cleaning all this out, it's a very deep process that you look at yourself and go, am I cleaning myself out, preparing myself for this Passover? Now, John, in 1 John chapter 29, we see John the Baptist. We see Jesus coming out of the wilderness, and he comes down to the River Jordan. And what does John say? In Hebrew he says, Chine se ha Elohim hanoseh chetat ha'olam, which means, in English, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. So John declares that this Yeshua, this Jesus that's coming out and coming down to the River Jordan to be baptized, that he is the Lamb of God. So this connection with the Passover and the deliverance and the freedom of being set free from slavery, the doorway and the doorpost and the passing over and the going through these thresholds, and this covering, that this blood, that a sacrifice is made to save the life of something else. And so this, and Yeshua being the firstborn, the first begotten of Yahweh, is the firstborn of Mary and Joseph. In that context of parents. And therefore we see this, that he's sacrificed on the Passover. He's the Lamb of Yahweh, he's the Lamb of God, and he's sacrificed on the Passover. The cross is this wooden door frame. His blood is shed upon this door frame. And what does he do? He's like the blood of the Lamb, the blood of the Lamb. We constantly kind of hear this in old hymns, the blood of the Lamb. And how important the blood of that Lamb is, that something is sacrificed and pays the price for something else. For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, we read in scriptures. And it's all tied in with that. So this great picture of Yeshua sacrificing himself, his blood, this lamb, the blood being shed. And that's what Passover is about. And that's the foundations. The foundations of Easter. Easter is built on the back of Passover. It's nothing different. It's almost exactly the same. Not quite. There are some differences. Of course there are some differences. But I would also like to very clearly point out to you that, Leviticus 23 says, these are the feasts of Yahweh. These are the feasts of God. It doesn't say this is the feast of the Jews, this is the feasts of Israel, these are the feasts of God. And I challenge you to read it, and I challenge you to look at that and spend time with that. God decided these feasts, not man, not Moses, nobody else. God set the times, and they're quite specific. You read them all through. There's more than one feast. There are others that follow in afterwards. Pentecost, what you call Pentecost, Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks. That's another feast. Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the only time that the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies and pour blood over the mercy seat for the atonement of sin for the whole nation. The Day of Trumpets, the Feast of the Blowing of Trumpets. The Feast of Trumpets is another feast that is before Yom Kippur, actually. And then you have the Feast of Tabernacles, or the Feast of Booths, or Sukkot. That is the last feast, and that lasts for 8 days. And the first day is a high Sabbath, and the last day is a high Sabbath. Doesn't matter what day that is, whatever day the first day falls on, it's a high Sabbath. They're treated exactly the same as a regular Saturday Sabbath. So, not only that, Fred also asked me to talk to you about first fruits as well. So first fruits is quite unique, because first fruits it's a feast within a feast, because you have Passover on the 14th day of Nisan, then the Feast of Unleavened Bread starts for 7 days, And after the Sabbath, it talks about after the Sabbath, in the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the day after is first fruits. Now, first fruits is all about, Yahweh said, when you go into the land, and again, you can read that in what we've just read in Leviticus 23, where it talks about the feast of first fruits, which is verse 10 and verse 11 of 23. When you come into the land which I give unto you, and you reap the harvest thereof, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest unto the priests. And the priest shall wave the sheaf before Yahweh to be accepted for you on the morrow after the Sabbath. The priest shall wave it. So it's called the wave offering. Now I want to point out something quite important here to you, is that the New Testament always calls Yeshua, he's the first fruits. This is where it connects. He's the first fruits of the resurrection. So we all hope, everybody that's died in Messiah, knowing Yeshua, they will resurrect with Yeshua, and they will dwell with him in glory. But he's the first of the resurrection. Okay, he's alive, he's living, he's resurrected from the dead, and so that when we are dead, we resurrect with him. He is the first fruits. But what's important to point out is that I want to just if you know the story, when Jesus rose from the dead, and Mary Magdalene it was early in the morning, it was still dark. She was in the garden and she went to the place, and it was after the Sabbath, after a Sabbath, possibly after the high Sabbath, or after the natural Sabbath, that she went down to anoint. She went down and she was hoping to anoint him. And then she sees this figure in the garden, and she thinks it's the garden, doesn't she? And then he speaks to her, and then she realises it's him, and she says, Rabboni, and she reaches out to him and he says, don't touch me. I have not yet ascended to my Father in heaven and presented to myself to him. Yeshua is the first fruits of the resurrection. Yeshua is the wave offering that the priest waved before the people to be accepted on their behalf. So Yeshua had to then, after his death, his crucifixion, and then when he rose from the dead, he had then to go to heaven, to present himself, to wave himself before God, to be accepted by Yahweh on our behalf. So he's the first fruits of the resurrection. But the first fruits is more that's a deep spiritual aspect of first fruits. The first fruits also talks about when you go into the land that Yahweh gives us, that when the harvest comes, the first of the harvest belongs to Yahweh, and you offer it to Yahweh. A very practical thing. Now let us consider that. Everything that we have. I at the moment, I'm working on a farm, and we've been laying down some beds, and we've started planting seeds. I've done bits of gardening work throughout the years. I've had my own garden a while back, and I've grown things where I am now, and I've grown things at work, and I am always astounded and amazed at the miracle of things growing. You put a tiny seed in the ground, that's it. Dig a hole, drop a seed in the ground, cover it over, might put a bit of water on it to begin with, and that's it. And miraculously, that seed takes hold in the ground, and it comes up as a shoot, and it grows. Whatever seed it is that you planted, it grows and it flourishes and it reaches fruition, and then we take it, whether it's herbs or whether it's carrots, peas, tomatoes, potatoes, whatever it is. And I have done nothing. There is nothing in my power that can turn that seed into herbs, vegetables, fruits. There is nothing that I can do. Gardeners can say, well, I've got green fingers and I've got this and that and the other. But you know what? If Yahweh doesn't make the sun shine, if he doesn't bring good air and rainwater and the miracle that is within that seed, it's not happening. Forget it. If Yahweh doesn't make it grow, everything that we have comes from Yahweh. Our daily bread. In the Lord's Prayer, we talk about our daily bread. give us this day our daily bread. Because people knew, Yeshua knew, that unless Yahweh provides, it's not there. We've seen droughts across the world. We've seen famine across the world. In the Bible times, there were many famines. Abraham experienced one. There were famines in the New Testament, at least 2, that just happened. There were famines. There was a famine in the time of, isn't it, Ruth and Naomi? There was a famine then, and then they went away, and then they came back. Then she came back. If Yahweh doesn't work, if Yahweh doesn't make it work, it's not going to happen. So first fruits is also about being thankful and recognising the power and the greatness and the miraculousness of God, that He gives us our daily bread. He gives us the seed to plant in the ground, and He makes it grow. So first fruits is about this as well. It's about when you come into the land, the first fruits belong to me. This is on top of the tithe, on top of the 10% that Jacob promised to God when he was destitute and he had nothing. And he said, if you look after me, God, I'll give you 10% of everything that I have. And that's where the tithe comes from, originally from Jacob. But the first fruits is on top of that, of saying the first of everything belongs to Yahweh. To honour Him, to bless Him, to glorify Him, to give thanks unto Him. And this is it. So that's it. That's it. Passover and first fruits, a feast within a feast. Its connection to the land, its connection to Israel, its connection to Yahweh, and how they wrap around each other, and how they are set times, specifically set by Yahweh. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed that. Any questions, feel free to throw them to Fred, and if I can answer anything else that you have questions about, I'd be quite happy to do so. Okay, well, it's Passover this weekend, and I do know that Fred is planning a Zoom meeting on Saturday evening. Hopefully I'll see lots of you there, and we can just have a little chat about Passover and see what that's all about. Okay, Yahweh bless you. Be blessed in Jesus, be blessed in Yeshua. Have a great week. Shalom and goodbye.